What's up guys, this is Tassian with Cymatics, and today I'm going to show you how to make the lead from the Slander and Yuki song After All, the Xilent remix. So this isn't an exact recreation. I mean, we got pretty damn close, but the lead is pretty wild. So I'm just going to show you how to get close to that, and basically you'll just be learning a new timbre of sound. Before we start, I'm going to play what we got. So I'll show you the original, and then I'll show you what we got. So this is the little loop. And this is the lead we have. So yeah, like I said, not exactly the same, but it's pretty damn close. So we got this patch and the MIDI in the download below in the description. So definitely cop that and follow along with us. All right, I'm gonna make a new MIDI track and open up Serum, and then we'll get started. So now we should be hearing. Alright, so we're going to be using oscillator A, oscillator B, and the sub-oscillator. We're not going to be using the noise oscillator. So oscillator A is going to be PMW Inception, and oscillator B is going to be Basic Shapes. So now we should have something like this. Alright, it's also important, there are some overlapping notes in this, so we're going to turn on mono and legato and turn on always, so the pitch bend is always, or the portamento is always happening. And we're going to turn this up a little bit, so now we should have like a little bit of gliding between the notes. So first thing we're going to do, let's deal with these oscillators right now. So we're going to drop oscillator A down an octave, and we are going to bring the wavetable position to around 2 o'clock. And this is basically just going to add some more, more grit to it, since there's more happening in the wavetables. All right. And we're also going to select for our warp mode, FM from B. All right, so basically what that means is oscillator B is going to be feeding through oscillator A and giving it this like kind of crazy distorted sound. So oscillator B, we're actually going to bump up an octave, and that's pretty common because the oscillator that's feeding through the oscillator with FM from B on is typically an octave to like 3 octaves higher. And you can get a really cool sound that way. So right now we're not going to hear anything. But what we're going to do is we're actually going to turn the volume of oscillator B all the way down, so this won't be playing. And we're going to start turning up FM from B, and you'll be able to hear the sound it's having. So yeah, it's pretty damn gritty. So we're going to leave it at around like 11 o'clock. And then we're also going to change the wavetable of oscillator B. I typically like, when I'm doing FM basses, I like to use Basic Shapes because I like to keep the wavetables pretty like clean and basic. If you're going to use one like really like, noisy and grimy, it's not gonna, it's just gonna sound like noise most of the time. Sometimes you get lucky, but you're usually better off using pretty simple wavetables. So we're gonna drag this until we get this wave. And then for the bend mode, we're also gonna put it on bend plus. So right now we should be hearing this. And we're gonna drag this up to about 11 o'clock. And basically that is moving the outsides a little bit more in. So it's basically making it a little bit thinner right there, giving it just a different quality. And we're also going to bump up the unison to 2. So right now the unison's at 1, which means that only one voice is playing and it's completely in tune. If we bump this unison up to 2, there will be 2 voices and neither of them will be in the right tune. So I like to kind of explain this by, if I have 3 voices, the one that's directly in the middle, the yellow one, is completely in tune, and the 2 green ones on the outside are out of tune. So the one on the right is a little bit higher, and the one on the left is a little bit lower. So when I drag this detune knob all the way down, all the notes are pretty much in tune, but when I drag it all the way up, the ones on the right and the left are really, really out of tune. So what we're going to do is we're going to drag this to 2 voices, so neither of them are completely in tune, and we're going to drag this detune knob down to around 9 o'clock. So now we should be hearing something very similar, but the sound might be a little bit wider or just like a little bit thicker. there's like a little bit of phasing going on. You can kind of hear that. All right. And I also forgot for the sub, we're going to drop this down an octave as well. So you can really hear, like, you could just like feel the bass on that sub. Okay, so let's route our first LFO right now. So this first LFO is just going to control the attack of envelope 1, which is going to be routed to a few different things. So we're going to hold shift and we're going to make a, we're going to drag this all the way to the top for the first 2 bars and then drag it all the way down for the rest. And we're going to take the rate to 1/2 and turn on trig. So every time there's a new note, this LFO will restart. And we're going to take that to attack and drag it up to around there. And then we're also going to take LFO or envelope 1 and drag it to the FM from B and drag the range to around right there. So when I first looked at this patch, I was a little confused by this, and then I realized that as this keeps going, it's basically changing the attack of envelope 1 and kind of just creating like different movements in the FM section. Also, we're going to turn on our filter, and we're only going to have it affect oscillator A because oscillator B is completely turned off. We're not using the noise oscillator, and the sub oscillator has direct out. And we are going to go to flanges and do comb H6 plus. And we're going to start playing with this now. So right now what you should be hearing is this. All right. So we're going to drag this down to around 120, 117 hertz. So you should be hearing something pretty similar, and that's because we haven't bumped this resonance up. When we bump this resonance up, it is going to take on a completely new sound. So you're getting that like super metallic vibe. I personally love this comb filter so much. I use it in so many of my sounds, and automate the cutoff. So you can actually just like, so if you just like throw that thing around, like you can get some crazy results. And this envelope 1 is also going to be put on the comb, just a teeny tiny bit. And it's not going to do that much drastic, but it will make a small difference in the end. So let's put that back there. All right, so the resonance is up. We're also going to take this pan and put it, bring it a little bit down. And this isn't actually, you're not even panning it right to left. This is like a stereo, like a width knob. So if we drag this all the way to the right, it becomes super wide. And if we drag it to the left, it just like kind of, I don't know, it gives it a different stereo effect. So I thought that it was kind of going to make the width smaller, but it doesn't. It just gives it a different stereo effect, but it's pretty cool. All right, and then we're going to take this high pass frequency, and we are going to drag it up to around here. And you can see as I'm dragging it up really high, it will start to, the comb filter will not affect the lower frequencies. So if you want to drag it all the way up, it's only going to affect the really high frequencies, but we're going to drag it up to around right here. And then this is actually really, really cool. If you select this, it changes from a dry wet mix to a level. So now you're adjusting the overall volume, and it's like instead of adjusting the volume going into the comb filter, that volume will stay the same, but you can then adjust the output volume of the entire signal after the filter, which I thought was like so cool because I used to do it with the drive, but then you're like almost clipping the filter and it's adding some distortion. So this is just like a good way to adjust the volume going into it without actually like clipping the filter. So let's just double check what we have right now. All right, so now we're going to get into the beef of it, and that is this second LFO. This is going to be moving like 7 different things and really creating like the whole movement for the track. All right, so let's make this LFO 2 shape. So this phrase is going to be a half bar long, and we are going to select trig because we want this to restart every time a new MIDI note is pressed. So I'm going to start by holding shift and dragging up 2 bars worth. And then I'm going to take this point right here and I'm going to hold option and start dragging down. And basically this will snap to your grid. If I don't have that on, it will move freely, and I just think it's easier to snap to your grid so you know everything's exactly in line. And we're going to make another point and bring it down just like that. So basically we're going to have this shape, this descending saw, and then we're going to do the same thing over here. Hold Alt and drag that down, or hold Option and drag that down. So now we have these 2 descending saws, and then we're going to skip 2 of these bars and do another one. So after that, we're going to give it a little curve. I used to go in one by one and adjust these curves, but if you hold Alt and select these, you can drag them all up at the exact same rate. So we're going to drag it to right around there. And now we're going to start assigning this LFO to some different knobs. So we're going to take this and start with the level, because that is what's going to give the sound the movement and the rhythm. So we're going to assign that to oscillator A, and we're also going to assign that to the sub oscillator. And we're going to drag the ranges up right around there. So now we should be hearing. So that's exactly the rhythm that we want. So now it's time to dive in and do this a little bit more. We're going to drag LFO to the wavetable position of oscillator A. And this will just be slightly moving this wavetable position of oscillator A and giving it a little bit more movement. We're also going to drag this to oscillator B, the warp mode. And this will just be moving this wavetable like in and out almost. It's nothing extremely drastic, but I think it's these little movements that give the sound more life over the course of, the sound design process. And then we're also going to go to the filter and drag this to that level, that newly found level. And basically what this is going to do is when you make these, like let's keep this level all the way up. When you make all these different movements and it's going into like a comb filter or flange filter, a lot of times it starts to get like kind of messy. And when you have this cutoff down like pretty low, there starts to be like this kind of delay. So you can hear it when I drag it down really low. So you hear that delay that's kind of happening. So it starts to become really messy. Now you can really clean it up. Like such a drastic difference from that to this. It just really gets cleaned up around these little silence parts. All right, so now we're going to move on to the effects because we've done everything we need to do in the oscillator tab. Thank God. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go to our effects and we're going to open up the hyper/dimension. So this is basically just going to add some width to your track. So real quick, these are the settings that it comes with, so you can listen to it. It kind of takes away the transients when you have this hyper up too high. So we're going to drag this down, and this is basically kind of detuning your sound for you and adding like a false detune, kind of how we did with the oscillators. And this dimension, we're going to drag this up, this mix up, and we're going to take the size down. And basically what this is doing is this is creating a small delay between the left and the right, which is making like a tiny echo. And it's also kind of giving stereo space. So we can listen to this now. And if we want to really make that a dramatic effect, just so you guys can hear. So we're just gonna add that like very subtly, and that'll give like some cool sort of stereo effect. All right, so the next thing we're gonna add is a phaser. And when you normally turn on the phaser, there is the rate is set at something. So that basically means that this frequency knob will be moving to the rate of this, almost like it's an LFO. But we're going to turn that all the way down. So right now, what you should hear with this phaser just being on is, and you can hear like it's just phasing at a different rate. So we're going to turn that all the way down and use our own LFOs to control this. So we're going to take LFO 2 and we are going to drag it to frequency, and we're going to hold shift and option to make this range only go one way. And we're going to drag that all the way back to the top, and we're going to make this range just move like very, very soft. Like it's not going to really be doing a ton. And you should be hearing. So it sounds much more controlled and in sync with the sound because it's following the same pattern as this LFO. And what we're going to do is we're going to turn this depth up as well. This is going to just exaggerate the phase. And we're going to take this LFO 2 and drag it onto the feed just like that. So you should be hearing. Then the next thing we're going to do is take this phase knob and turn it all the way up. You can start to hear those like highs, you know, those really like high pitch frequencies. So this is like very kind of excessive. So we're going to take this mix and drag it down to just below halfway. So we only just want this to kind of like add a little bit to our sound. We don't want it to fully rely on the phaser. So you can still hear it in there a little bit, but it's not completely dominating the sound. And next thing we're going to do after that is we're going to add a compressor and make it into a multi-band compressor. So right now what you would hear is this is just acting as a normal compressor. It's catching all the peaks, but nothing is hitting the threshold right now. So what we're going to do is we're going to select multi-band, and this turns into the OTT preset, which stands for over the top, which just flattens all your frequencies and really like squishes everything together and makes it like kind of thick. So this is like super popular. I mean, a lot of like dubstep trap people use this on almost all their synths. I know I do, especially when I'm making basses in Serum. So we're gonna put that on multiband, and we're gonna start playing with this right here. So what's really cool about this, and a lot of people just like overlook this a lot, is that you can actually take these bands and drag them. So we're gonna leave this at 100. Also going to leave this at 100. We're going to take the lows and drag that to 0. So let's bring this back up to 100, and let's hear the difference between the multiband compressor on and off. So it kind of smooths out all the transients, and it really like brings out the highs. So we're going to drag this back down to 0. And this will kind of just like exaggerate the highs as well again. And we're going to take this threshold and slide it down to around right here. And that's just going to kind of compress the sound a little bit less, and in turn things will be louder because there's less compression. We're going to leave the ratio where it is, the attack where it is, and we're going to take the release and drag it down a tiny bit. And that's not something you'd be able to hear right off the bat audibly, but it's just taking a little bit shorter for the compressor to stop compressing the sound when the signal leaves the compressor. We're also going to take this gain and bring it up a little bit just to bring a little bit of gain back. So yeah, it's starting to sound really sick. So let's drag this reverb on. And normally what you'd have is this hall reverb. And these are all the settings that come up when you first add the reverb. So you should be hearing, which definitely sounds cool. I mean, I love the stock reverb in Serum, but we're actually going to change this. So we're going to change this from hall to plate, which is a different style of reverb. And we're just going to leave the size there. We're going to take the pre-delay up, which is going to kind of like turn off the reverb for this set amount of time when the signal comes in. So I'll exaggerate it a lot. So that's a pretty cool setting because it basically clears out the reverb, and then it will start 250 milliseconds after the signal is done. But we're going to take this and we're going to put it just below the halfway point at around like 52. And we're going to take this low cut and we're going to drag it up to around there. And that's basically just cutting all the lows out of the reverb because you don't want some of those muddy lows. And then we're going to take this high cut and drag it up. And we're going to drag this damp up to around here. And so we're actually going to take this width and drag it all the way up. And this is just going to make the stereo or the reverb a little bit wider. And that sounds really good. That's not like overwhelming reverb, but it is like a little space. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to add a little bit of delay, and this is just going to be a very short delay, and it's going to really add like a nice stereo effect, so it's not going to be like one of these delays. So where that's more of an echo, we're going to turn this into like a stereo kind of effect. So we're going to unselect or deselect BPM because we want this to turn into milliseconds rather than a BPM sync. And we're going to turn this on link so both of them are changing at the same time. And we're going to set this to somewhere around like 7-ish. So this is just going to be, it's going to be delaying the sound every 7 milliseconds. So right now you should be hearing, and it's kind of tough to hear, but we're going to turn this feedback up. So when you turn it up really high, you can just hear when the signal goes into the delay, it's repeating every 7 seconds or 7 milliseconds, and it depending on how much feedback you put back into it. And we're also going to drag this down a tiny bit. So that's just adding like a nice stereo space. All right, so the last thing we're going to do is I'm going to bring you over to this little section right here. And this section is often overlooked. I rarely ever use it, but with this kind of sound, it can be very effective. So we're going to take this note follower. So this is like a key tracking thing you can modulate different effects with. So basically when you play different notes, I'm just playing different notes on my keyboard. So you can see where this is right here. And if I go up a few octaves higher, it's following that. So we're going to take this and we're going to put it on the phaser frequency. And it's right now it's going one way. We're going to want to hit Shift and Option to make it go both ways. And we're going to drag it all the way up. So basically what that's doing is this is where at whatever note we play, it will be hitting different points on this frequency. And we can actually tone this down a tiny bit. We don't have to take it all the way up. But now let's see if we hear anything different. So it's not a huge noticeable difference, but you can see this little key tracking thing following when different notes are being played. So there you go. And the last thing we have to add is this bit warmer preset, which is under the saturator folder in the Ableton Audio Effects. And this will just like beef up your sound and distort it a little bit, kind of compress it, and just make it a little bit warmer. So now we should be hearing. After looking through the original patch, I realized that I did not have the key tracking on the filter cutoff. So basically what that's going to do is when we have different notes, the cutoff filter is going to be moving. And then also another thing that I got wrong was this mix, detune, and rate was set to a macro. So this rate was pretty low. The detune was actually higher, and the mix was up to around here. And that's basically going to give it a wider, more metallic sound. And then if you look at the original, this is actually a pretty cool trick. Is a lot of people don't go into the global tab, but if you bump this range up for the unison, if there are multiple voices being played, it actually bumps up the voices even more. So we're going to go back in and go to that global tab and bump it up to around 7, and we should kind of get something closer now. But anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and this project file, the MIDI and the patch, will be in the description for download. So I definitely recommend that you grab that and play around with it, and don't get discouraged if yours didn't come out exactly like mine did, because it's really, really tough to kind of nail this sound exactly unless all your knobs are exactly the same value as the original, because so much can go wrong when you're like adjusting this cutoff and this FM and all the little different knobs around here. So I would definitely just kind of go in, do it a few times, and you'll start to figure out where the little areas are that could give you trouble and where you really have to pay attention and start fine tuning, because not all these knobs are created equally. A lot of them do a lot more than others do. So definitely go in and play around with that, and I hope you guys get some cool results. But anyway, thank you for watching. I'm Tassione, and this is Cymatics.